So, Berto, in these troubling times, I thought we would just put all this stuff aside and just answer some patron emails and just chat about some regular stuff. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I make stay-at-home wellness kits.
So this first email is from Patron Alexis. We know her. She came to one of our live shows, if you remember her. And she says, regarding the sex education show. So for those who don't know, it's a TV show that I've watched, I think, the first couple episodes. You've watched, I think, the first season.
Yeah.
And it's a show about a high school kid who has a mother who's a sex therapist or a sex educator of some sort. And he ends up becoming a unlicensed sex therapist in his high school because so many of his classmates are suffering from sex-related issues. And there's all this misinformation out there. And he's also kind of nerdy and, he has some social anxiety, but now he has this, this purpose that, anyway, so
Right.
That's the premise of the show, and hijinks ensue, and it's basically a comedy. Regarding this sex education show, one of the things that frustrated me was the portrayal of how out of touch the main character's mother was when she spoke so openly about sex. Okay, just chiming in here again. The mother is actually played by the woman who was Scully on The X-Files. Was that her name? And is she British?
Oh, is she?
Because doesn't she have
Gillian Anderson?
Doesn't she have a British accent in that show?
Oh, well, but I didn't think she was really British.
Yeah,
maybe she is.
But sometimes you find out like, oh, they were always, like the guy,
like Christian Bale.
Yeah, like the guy in The Wire, the main police officer.
Yeah.
He's like from the UK. Anyway,
yeah.
And then also the other guy from The Wire. Idris Elba is also from the UK. But anyway, the mother in this TV show, she is extremely open with her son about sex and will talk openly about sex toys and positions and her own sexuality. And I think he even overhears her talking with her clients about sexual things. And he's, younger and awkward and it doesn't feel super comfortable talking with his mom about these things. And they kind of portray that. But my take of the way the writers and directors and actors are telling that story is like, she's just liberated up, to the highest degree. And we should all kind of aspire, at least in some ways, towards her liberated sexual, sex positive attitude. Is that your take on that, on the mom character?
Well, I do agree with that part. However, I think there is this aspect, which is maybe what they're getting at with the question, but she's not only liberated, she is also a therapist. And I think it does show sort of a lack of awareness of the mental impact of her liberatedness and practice on her teenage son. Now, having grown up with a father who was a psychiatrist, who was a child psychiatrist, I can attest that, just because you're a child psychiatrist doesn't mean that you're always, doing the right perfect things for your child. But in any case, I do think that she, being a therapist and a sex therapist, I don't know, she could be more aware of like, well, wait a minute. Not every family is this open. Not every child at school has a mother like me. So this might have a certain impact on my child. And maybe I need to do more about talking about that. Maybe I need to do a little bit more privacy with my client. Like those kinds of things,
Right. So going on with Alexis's email, one of the main things that frustrated me was the portrayal of how out of touch the main character's mother was when she spoke so openly about sex. The mom is my favorite character in the show, and while she's not perfect, I loved a lot of her approach to be frank in discussions about sex. A few of my friends who watched the show talked about how awful her parenting was and how she has no boundaries. When I expressed I would hope to approach sex with my children one day in the same way, almost everyone made a face and said something to the effect of, "You might want to rethink that." I was very happy when you talked about how awkward society is around sex and how parents are made to feel like they shouldn't approach their kids when it comes to subjects of sex. And that it's bad and weird and doesn't respect quote unquote boundaries. It made me feel very empowered in my beliefs. I'm curious if you had any perspective on how to challenge ideas like this as an average person who isn't a parent or a therapist when talking with other people about this topic. Berto, what do you think?
I cannot disagree that I think the normal quote unquote approach to sexuality is awful. It's been historically awful. I mean, seriously, right? Like I don't know how far back in time or what kind of societies you'd have to look at where the approach wasn't awful. Animals, don't seem to have so many hangups. But we sit here and I'm not even going to talk about the extremes because the extremes can get so horrific even in current times. But I'm just talking about we have kids who they start having their period and they think they're dying because no one's told them anything. Or we have kids who have their first wet dream and they are freaking out because they think there's something medically wrong with them, right? We have any number of states in this country where you're supposed to not think about it, not talk about it, certainly never have any sex, not talk about contraception or whatever. And then they have crazy numbers of pregnancies and teenage abortions and all these things. So yeah, no, I think it's terrible. So could we benefit from a more open, more a progressive way to approach sexuality and conversations? Absolutely, I do believe so.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that is common that I'll just provide is that a lot of people who are born with vaginas will never look at their vagina because they're ashamed of the way it looks, or they don't even want to look at it because they're afraid of what they're going to see, or they think they're weird or creepy for looking at it. And they might be 35 years old and barely have any knowledge of what's going on down there for them. Now, not everyone has to do that, of course, but I would imagine that most people would at least be curious from time to time, maybe once a year, I wonder, does it still look the same? What's going on down there?
Yeah.
And to have a physician who, occasionally checks things out down there, to have it be so much more intimate with your intimate parts is, it's upsetting, and because of the shame that we give people. Anyway, but your main question here, Alexis, is how do you talk with people? How do you change people's perspective? You're like, hey, I think that we all could benefit with more sex positivity, including around our kids. And there's all these people around me that with sex negativity, how am I supposed to react? I kind of want to change their mind because I want everyone to be more sex positive about that. So yeah, it's really hard to change people's minds, especially in the immediate situation. Usually what I think about is what we used to call back in the day, planting seeds. So back in the day, I used to treat a lot of teenagers that didn't really want to be in therapy, or at the very least, they didn't really want to change things about them. And as therapists, it was really hard to change people and their behavior, and it was hard to cope with as well because you just feel like you're beating your head up against the wall. And I'm talking about things like, just saying positive things about yourself was a hard thing for a lot of teenagers to accept and do. And the things that we would tell ourselves is we're planting seeds. We're planting seeds when they're 14 that might grow into something by the time they're 25, for example. So don't expect, if you plant a seed, you don't stand over it and go where's the plant? It's you got to wait. And you might not ever see the growth because by the time you terminate with this client, there won't be any noticeable growth, but it will grow if you keep planting those seeds. So that's one way to think about it. And I just wrote down this possible thing that you might be able to say. This would be said if you had the time and the sort of space to say it. You might say, when I was growing up, I heard a lot of messages of shame about sex, and that made me feel ashamed of my sexuality at times. And I don't want my children to go through that. I want them to feel free to talk about things if they want. I want them to be okay with their sexuality. I'm not going to invade their space and make them feel uncomfortable and do things that, they don't want to do. But I do plan on modeling a healthy and liberated attitude about sexuality, and an attitude that says, you know what, sex is good and it's okay to talk about it. So that might be something to say, right? You're saying, yeah, it's true. There are boundaries, and I'm not going to invade people's spaces, but I am going to have an attitude of openness and liberation that is inviting to my children, that allows them to feel good about their sexuality, and also is open to them asking me questions or expressing themselves or whatever. But yeah, I mean, but it's, no matter how liberated one is, there's society, which is going to overwhelm any influence you have over your child. There's just so much propaganda in our society that is sex negative. TMI and ew, that's, that's creepy. And I mean, even to the level that, just as an example of this, that might seem very relatable to people, is I grew up in the 70s wearing shorts that were extremely short compared to today. And I never really acclimated to the fashion change. I acclimated to other fashion changes, I suppose, but that was one fashion change or fashion element that I just retained. And to this day, I feel extremely comfortable in extremely short shorts and don't feel like I'm showing too much skin. And when I see people in really short shorts, it doesn't really trigger anything in me. There are some people, and I've heard people say this, that shorts should be below the knee. That anything above the knee with shorts is showing too much. Now, they won't say showing too much skin. They'll just say, ew, it's creepy. Ew, what are you doing? It's like, I guess it would be culturally for me as if someone was walking around in a banana hammock or something. And so that is sex shaming, for me, when I walk around and they're not even, I'll accommodate. So I'll go halfway down my thigh with my shorts. I'll still get people going, ew, shorts. And I'm like, you're just shaming people's fucking bodies at that point. You're just shaming, you're basically saying like, the closer your eyes get to my genitals is like a really bad thing, And it's like, that's a very, now 99% of the listeners right now are like, but I agree, it is gross to me. Well, you have to ask yourself, why is it gross to you? Now, there's nothing wrong with having a fashion sense or I don't like that haircut because I don't like mullets, for example, or I don't like tails, or I don't like mohawks or something. That's different. That's fashion. It's also a little bit judgy of other people, but that's fashion. This is 90% of the reason why people are averse to short shorts. I am positive it's because of sex negativity. We've almost become more sex negative as society has progressed from the 70s in a lot of ways. And I don't appreciate it. If you don't want to wear short shorts, great. That's your fashion. But if someone else like me wears short shorts, like, give me a fucking break. It's just my goddamn thighs. You know what I mean? Like, what's wrong? Yeah. Like, it's okay for me to show my calf, but my thigh and my knee is like disgusting to you and I should cover it up. I find that to be extremely sex negative. And this sort of stuff is everywhere, like it's pervasive. There are people that are really quite enlightened who have fully got on board with sex negativity in our culture.
Yeah.
Next email from anonymous patron. He writes, I was wondering what your thoughts were on stage fright or maybe performance anxiety. I saved this email just for you, Berto, because
yes,
this is a very good one. I recently started seeing a therapist last year to deal with some severe depression and had embedded itself pretty deeply over the last several years. My therapist has been a huge help in that regard, and I've been wondering how successful therapy is at treating stage fright, either the cause or its symptoms. I was very serious about music in my youth, but ultimately gave up my passion after never being able to conquer my fear, self-consciousness, and physical symptoms that would impair my natural abilities while playing in front of people. Fast forward around 15 years, I took up my instrument again as a form of self-prescribed therapy and to have a healthy hobby, but have found that my old demons still haunt me. I thought I wouldn't care anymore after all these years, but when I sense someone looking or listening intently to me, the physical symptoms come back, sweaty or clammy in places, blushing, trembling, even though I can stay calm on the surface. I'm not sure what my therapist thinks when I talk about it, but I get the impression they think it goes deeper than simply pre-performance jitters or a matter of just practicing more. Everything I had read about stage fright seems to indicate no one knows the cause or cure, and that you just have to manage the symptoms or take beta blockers or something. Do you think there are deeper underlying issues at play here? I should add that I can quickly trigger myself to feel similarly on the spot with almost any performance-like activity. Dancing is its own kind of hell, but luckily that doesn't come up too often. Music is important to me, though, and this condition taints it for me. Any thoughts would be appreciated, and also thank you for the podcast. Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, this is such a real thing. Look, I am someone that loves being in front of people talking, and I used to have no problems raising my hand constantly in class, calling me, I'll talk. And I used to put on little performances for my family and blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't matter. When I had to perform in front of people, my music that supposedly I had rehearsed, even when I was well rehearsed, which wasn't always, it still frightened me. And it frightened me in a way that I couldn't control. Basically, I would start feeling definitely sweaty and panicky, and I would get this sense like everything in my body was conspiring against me. Like my throat would start kind of freezing up, like my muscles felt like they were constricting, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to even sing. And then I would get up there and I'd be really like stressed because like I'm trying to plug in all the instruments and if you've ever performed at a club, especially if you're first starting out, there's so many things that you have to worry about. And then I would make matters worse for myself because when I first started playing with a band, I would have all these extra accoutrement, like lights that I would need to plug in. And I was trying to make it really like a fancy show, but I hadn't mastered the basics yet. So in addition to everything else, I was stressed about having to get everything right. And then the show would start and I would like worry because I'm going to forget my lyrics. And by worrying, I actually did forget some of my lyrics. And then my voice was going to crack, and then it would crack because I was worried. And then, oh my gosh, it was horrible. And that went on for, I don't know, a long time, years. And over time, I think by doing it enough, I started getting to a more functional place. But even nowadays, years and years later, after playing so many times and all these things, I have to put a show on, unless I am super, super, super well rehearsed and it's a totally, totally friendly audience, I will still feel a lot of those feelings. It's really hard for it to go.
Yeah, you and I have performed on stage in a variety of contexts ever since that was how we met, was we started in a band together. And I would say that in the beginning, you were way more comfortable on stage than I was. I have massive performance anxiety, anonymous patron. So I could talk for a long time about performance anxiety and all the different manifestations of it. And I can totally relate because you're sitting at home and you're doing your thing by yourself, and you're like, okay, this is going pretty good. You get on stage, you get the jitters, you forget what you're supposed to do, and everything comes out wrong, and it just ruins the whole experience. You just wish you could just do what you were doing in your bedroom on stage, and it rarely worked out that way. And I would say in the beginning, you and me, and for you and me, Berto, you were more comfortable on stage than I was, and I was just utterly terrified. I do not know what the hell happened over time. The only thing I can think of is that I got better with it was just repetition, but also I think growing older for me, and I think for a lot of people, there's just certain things that just mellow out for me, and I just find myself just not giving a fuck anymore. And if you would have asked me when I was 35 if I gave a fuck, I'd be like, no, I don't give a fuck. But I don't think my body was there yet. I feel like at the age of 49, my body doesn't give a fuck anymore, And to some extent, that's actually kind of there's downside to that, where I'll be in meetings at the university and I'll just start spouting shit that later on I'm like, I probably shouldn't be spouting that much. But anyway, so yeah, I can totally relate. Going back, I've always thought I had this very weird condition that is like a catch-22, where I am massively compelled to get on stage and do things. Probably less so than you, Berto, but definitely, high on the scale compared to average. And yet at the same time, I'm probably more prone to performance anxiety than the average person as well. It's this, and I could go into detail, but one of the conceptualizations, at least for me, is that when you develop a narcissistic personality trait, as you and I did, we develop this personality trait as a way of trying to prove our worth to other people. That when we're 4 years old, 5, 6 years old, we learned through experience that in order to garner attention and love, one of the ways was to be on stage. Well, that promotes this compulsion to get on stage, and a sort of fantasy life that is present of just like, well, if I could just get on stage and prove to everyone that I have worth.
Right.
This podcast is actually another version of that, because it's essentially on stage when we're doing it. But what comes with that is this notion of like, well, if I fuck it up, then I won't be lovable, and no one will like me, and I'll be rejected. So that can create, if you're asking an honest patron for some underlying reason, I don't know if you suffer from this, but the same compulsion that you have to get on stage also is the same condition that causes a tremendous amount of anxiety about what if you fuck up. And so I have a friend, Todd. I don't think you've ever met him, Berto. He was a friend from a long time ago. And if you met him, you'd think he was kind of shy. He wasn't extroverted much. He was usually the quiet one. And I remember talking with him. He worked at Boeing. He was an engineer. And I was talking about my performance anxiety, and he was like, yeah, I can't relate to that, And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, at Boeing, I give presentations all the time, and I just get up on stage and I just do my thing and walk off, and sure, I might screw it up, but I don't know. I don't get nervous. And I was blown away by that, because I'm extroverted. I'm the one cracking the jokes. I'm the one getting on stage. He never chose to get on stage. He never wanted to, but the times when he was forced to, he didn't have any nervousness. And I thought, like, well, wait a second, like that doesn't make any sense to me. And I think it's because of what I was talking about earlier in terms of the narcissistic catch-22. There's so many different stories, but just to highlight for my life, I started off playing trumpet, and for whatever reason, I got pretty good compared to my classmates. And so I became like first chair trumpet in band when I was a kid. And Huber was the drummer in the band, by the way, or playing the triangle.
Nice.
And I would get solos, and I was terrified. I had a solo that I was given at the end of 6th grade. There was going to be this huge concert that involved all the elementary schools in the area, and it was going to involve there was going to be hundreds of people. They were combining several different bands together, and I had this trumpet solo. And the the director told me I was going to do it like, I don't know, 5 months in advance. And it was the easiest. It wasn't even really a solo. It was just like a trumpet part. It was probably like 3 or 4 notes that were extended whole notes. You know, it was easy. It was very simple, completely within my range. And I'll just never forget that every night almost as I was falling asleep in the 6th grade, I was in terror of that future event, you know, just staring in the darkness going like, oh my God, I have that solo coming up. And then I was practicing just before going on stage, and the director came and said, okay, are you guys ready? And I must have looked terrified. And he asked me, oh, are you kind of freaking out about this? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, well, you don't have to play it if you don't want to. It's not a big deal. And I remember just being so angry at him. It was like, why didn't you tell me this in the beginning? Because I would have said no. You know, I'm a good boy and I do what I'm told. And so you're telling me now that I could not do it. Like, it would be stupid for me not to do it at this point. I've suffered so much for the past 5 months. Like, of course I'm going to do it now. But why didn't you ask me that in the first place? Because I would have declined. You know what I mean? And so this was 40 years ago. I can remember staring into the darkness at night, you know, in my bed. You know, and it was that's the amount of performance anxiety that I've had, you know, for my entire life. I can tell you all these other stories. Then I started wrestling, and I played a lot of sports growing up, you know, track, baseball, basketball, football, volleyball, all these kinds of things. But wrestling, for whatever reason, it was probably my best sport. I was, pretty dominant in my league, and really enjoyed being good at wrestling. But wrestling is not a team. It's a team sport of sorts, but in terms of the matches, it's one-on-one, and as everyone knows. And that was so performance anxiety provoking to me that, again, I remember right after a wrestling match, I would be okay, like that night. And I would sleep well. The very next day, I would start worrying about the next match, which was 6 days in it, you know, because it was every Friday or something. And so for 6 nights out of the week, I'd be staring into the darkness going, oh my God, I have this wrestling match coming up, even though I was dominant in the league. Like, and that was part of the problem was I was always expected to win. And so it was tremendous pressure. It was like, I couldn't just relax and do the thing. It was like, I better fucking win. And of course it was all internal pressure. No one was putting pressure on me to do that, you know? And so I stopped wrestling, you know, halfway through my, you know, sort of scholastic career as a wrestler because I couldn't handle the anxiety at night. Man. And so I switched to basketball, which I'm not good at, but I'm good enough to be on a team. But I'm not, and average wise in terms of my peers, I'm not very good at basketball. But I played basketball because it was just there was
a team sport.
Yeah, it's team sport. It's like when you fuck up, it's like not noticeable, or you're not on the spot. Not every eye is on you. That kind of thing. Fast forward to just some other stories here about my performance anxiety. The very first time I sang in front of a crowd was a talent show in high school, and I had a girlfriend who was like a little Barbra Streisand. People always compared her to Barbra Streisand, and she was a beautiful singer, and that's like all she ever did was sing, sing, sing. And she was older than me, and she roped me into singing "Somewhere Out There" by somewhere out there beneath the pale blue sky.
Is that from West Side Story?
No, it's from a cartoon.
5-0 Goes West.
Yeah,
whatever that one.
Yeah, in the 80s. And Linda Rodstad and I can't remember the fellow's name. And
Peebo Bryson or something, or Aaron Neville?
No, not Aaron Neville.
Not Aaron Neville.
But I was a jock. Like I said, I played sports, and I wasn't a singer, and did not consider myself to be a singer or a drama person. I was a jock. I was a football player, and but she roped me into singing this song with her. And it was the big finale to the talent show. You know, it was the last hurrah of the entire night, and it was supposed to be like the sort of the gem of the night. And I was sitting off stage, again, just because of my performance anxiety, I'm sitting off stage, just terrified of it's coming. Oh my God, it's coming. And I would pace around the school in the back of the stage, just going like, how do I get out of this?
Poor Kurt.
What if I claimed I was mugged, and I couldn't go on stage? Is there any way I can get out of this? Even though I had agreed, and practiced and all this kind of stuff, but it was just like that physical terror where you're like, I get that it'll be okay. Of course, I know that I'm not going to be, tarred and feathered if this doesn't go well, but my body does not want to go on that stage. And then when I'm on the stage, of course, all the trembling and the sweating and you can't think straight and just all that stuff. Fast forward to me being in a band like you, in various bands, and then in a band with you. Same thing. We'd practice. I would feel good. I wouldn't tremble. Get up on stage. Trembling and singing do not go well together. And I want to give a good performance. I want to perform as good as I can when I'm in my bedroom, and it would just never work out that way. And when you and I were in a band together, I just felt like I was never 100% when we were on stage in front of people. I was always like at 80%, and I was after shows. I was always kind of bummed out about that, but you get used to it, Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is long, but I just for you performance anxiety people, I just want to talk about this. Teaching. When I started to teach, my mentor, Paul David, he actually harangued me into teaching. I didn't want to teach. He actually basically tricked me into doing it. I won't go into details, but he basically tricked me into teaching. And the night before teaching my first lecture, I was pacing around my apartment thinking, again, how am I going to get out of this? I can't do this. I'm going to fuck it up. I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I, and this is only in front of, 15 students, right? And I have my mentor there to, chime in if he needs to. And there's, it's pretty low expectations. I think but I was just utterly terrified, hyperventilating kind of experience, panicking. And I was this close, just like a hair width away from calling my mentor and saying, sorry, I can't do it. This is too much for me. And that would have completely changed the trajectory of my career and my life. Because if him and I would have separated, because he might have been like, okay, teaching, it's too much for you. I might not have ever worked at Antioch. I might not have developed the skills where I could actually become a podcaster. As an educator for many years, you just develop these skills in terms of how to communicate about things. And but something held me in there, and what held me in there was like I didn't want to disappoint my mentor. So I do the teaching, and I'm sweating, I'm terrified, I'm trembling, I'm shaking, everything's terrible, but I made it through it. Well, that did not that took away a lot of the performance anxiety as time went on, and eventually I was teaching my own classes, but I still had massive fucking anxiety while I was teaching.
Wow.
For the first 10 or 15 years, and because eventually I went to my physician and said, like, do you have anything? And they're like, well, there's this thing called a beta blocker, and the beta blocker ramps down your nervous system so that you don't have as much shakiness, and your heart doesn't start pounding, and you don't sweat as much. You still might be intellectually scared of the situation, but you don't have those physical symptoms. Because, it creates this feedback loop where you're on stage and you start to shake, and now you're worried that people can see you shaking, and that causes you to be more anxious, which causes more shaking. So I took beta blockers for the first 12 years of teaching.
Wow.
Yeah. So you would think after 5 years of being a professor that I would be comfortable enough to teach a class and not be freaking out. That was not the case. I took beta blockers every time I taught, probably for the first 12 years of teaching.
Oh my God.
That was a lot of beta blockers.
Yeah.
And that was the only time I ever took the beta blockers. It wasn't like there were other contexts that I needed it. It was just always before teaching. And so, yeah, I get the performance anxiety thing, man. Like, and it was a really big day when I was like, wait, I don't think I need these beta blockers anymore to teach. I must have crossed this threshold. And I'm a therapist. I know how to treat my own anxiety. I know how to categorize these things. I know how to do physical mindfulness to relax my body. I know all the tricks. I know all the things. I've been in therapy. I've talked about it. I know all the things, and yet had no power over my bodily reaction in situations like that. And the only thing that got rid of it was just fucking repetition. And so getting back to you and me, Berto, was in the beginning, you were less nervous on stage than I was. Well, in the intervening years that our band, dissolved, I've done a lot more on stage performing than I think you have. And because of that repetition and that acclimation and habituation, the student has surpassed the master in this way. And in that I've noticed that when you and I perform together musically, you're more nervous than I am when I get on stage, which I never noticed before because you were always cooler on stage than I was. But then, in the past 5 years when there's been musical performances, I'm like, oh, Alberto, it looks like he's got a little, he's got a little nervousness in that, in a way that I don't feel anymore because of just the sheer amount of repetition that I've done.
So a couple things. When you and I started playing, it was actually after a stint where I had been playing a ton. And I mean, like when you and I started playing with Shun, for example, because when I first started playing in a band was with my first version of Missionary, and I didn't realize that the way to do it wasn't to play out all the time. So we were playing out like 3 times a week at places, and practicing like 5 times a week. So we were playing so much and playing in so many places in front of people and hostile audiences, like at Hell's Kitchen down in Tacoma, which was like a heavy metal bar and stuff. Oh, and that stint was after I had done a stint of like 2 years of doing open mic nights constantly, where I couldn't really play, and I was putting myself out so much and in ways that I was very underprepared. So I feel like I had shocked my system into like at least pretending I was okay. So by the time you, Shun, and I started playing, I already had that under my belt. And then we started playing. But then when we were playing with Missionary, we were so well rehearsed when it was the best version of Missionary, as I'd say it. We were so well rehearsed that even though we had the keyboards and the stuff, like I actually felt the most probably prepared for those shows that I've ever done. And that really helped me. But even in spite of that, and you might have not seen it as much, internally I was still struggling a bit. Especially I was always worried about my voice because I wrote songs that were a little high and all these things. That was all still worrying me. When I started playing with Plastic Polly, at first we practiced like crazy. So that very first show you saw us at, that was at the place by the freeway there.
Yeah.
That one actually I was pretty good because we had been practicing constantly, like nonstop. So I felt pretty good. But after that, our performances were few and far between, and we weren't practicing as much. And so yeah, absolutely. So one thing that is directly correlated for me is the better prepared I am. And this is like obvious, but the better prepared I am, the more it helps me handle those feelings. And that's all I can say. I also say about sports, dude, I actually had performance anxiety playing basketball because back in junior high, I played basketball, and I actually was a really great defender, and I was really fast, and I would not tire. But every time I got the ball to make a shot, it was performance anxiety craziness, and I would miss so often just from that. Because I'm like, oh God, all eyes are on me, all eyes are on me. Whereas when I was defending and just running and passing, I'm like, okay, it's a team. It doesn't matter.
Right. And so I'm glad you're talking about that. That's interesting. I don't think we've ever explicitly talked about this before, but it's interesting for, because to be side by side with you on stage and to have never really talked about this explicitly is interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that last year I gave a presentation at a convention, and I had the shakiness again, like tremendously, like in my voice. And it was fucking embarrassing because I had colleagues who I teach with at the university in the audience. It was just a bunch of strangers. I'd be like, whatever. But I had people whom I guess I want to impress on some level. And for the first, 3/4 of the presentation, it was probably noticeable that I was nervous about something that it was a presentation I had practiced over and over and over again. I don't think I've ever been as well prepared for a presentation. And it was actually a presentation about how to use social media to enhance your practice as a therapist. I actually made it into an episode last year. And it's something that I know a lot about. It's basically how do you podcast as a therapist? I could talk off the top of my head. And yet, my body just was not happy with being on stage. And there weren't even that many people in the audience is the thing. It was just,
oh, wow.
When I'm at meetings at the university with people that I know and love and trust, and it's time for me to introduce myself, there's a new professor and everyone's going around introducing themselves. My body freaks out in a situation like that. It's it's absurd. So, now for people who don't have performance anxiety, fuck you. But for people who do, I want to model it's a somewhat intractable condition. A lot of people say just imagine everyone's naked, or just be yourself, or do deep breathing exercise. Fuck you, people. I'm a therapist. I know what to do. I have done the things. It has not cured it. There's something deeper or something more just physiologically baseline about this that it's annoying. It just gets in your way. So anonymous patron, I get it. Now, conceptualization, that's what you're asking about. So one way to conceptualize it is we've all been humiliated growing up. And those are semi, if not full-on traumatic events for us, where our full body has this visceral negative reaction to being humiliated on stage. We farted in class and everyone laughed at us. We, did something that everyone thought was stupid, or we tripped while we were trying to play soccer, or we talked at the dinner table and everyone in the family laughed at you at something you said. You said the wrong word or something. So we have physical neuronal realities that will kick in when we're in situations that are emulative, or at least, reminiscent of those early humiliation traumas. And if you've had a lot of humiliation traumas, then you're more likely to have what I imagine to be more visceral reaction when you got on stage. Also, for some people, they're just more anxious. They just have, say, a more active, nervous, anxious system in their brains. You and I are two of those people, and you tend to have all the anxieties. If you have one, then you're susceptible to all of them because they all involve the fear center of your brain just being overactive and easily triggered. And so you can have anxiety about anxiety, which causes even more anxiety. Also, it makes sense that it would be a normal bodily reaction for all of us. We probably evolved this sense that if we get rejected by the tribe, that's a threat to our survival. 200,000 years ago, if the tribe thought you were unworthy as a whole, you were potentially left in the woods alone to die and wouldn't get, food, wouldn't get protection from the herd. And so we likely evolved a mechanism that makes us all, whether it kicks in on performance anxiety or not, extremely interested in not making a fool out of ourselves in front of a large group of people, even though intellectually we're like, well, who the fuck cares? It doesn't apply anymore. I still have my job, I still have my people, but we have that sort of heuristic in our physiology. Another conceptualization of this is that we lack familiarity and exposure to certain things, which I'll get to in a second. And then, of course, the conceptualization of narcissism and perfectionism, which I was talking about earlier. So the cure is that I have found for myself are threefold. One is cognitive solutions. You got to push back on the anxiety as best you can. And an anonymous patron, you're doing this to yourself as well. You're just like, what's the big deal? I can do this, So saying things to yourself that everything's going to be okay. It doesn't matter if you make a fool out of yourself. I'm going to make this a fourfold thing. Is talking about it. I think talking about it as you're leading up to it helps. Like, I find this really true for a lot of anxious situations. For me, is when I'm anxious, I tend to shut down, but that doesn't help. And so it helps if I'm anxious to just, the first person I can, I just tell, I'm not excited about needles when I go to the doctor. And the phlebotomist, the person who has to draw the blood or something, I find 90% of the anxiety goes away, or I don't know, half, if I make a joke to the phlebotomist that I'm terrified. I'm like, I'll just be like, so just to let you know, needles really freak me out. I don't know. There's I'm kind of a wuss when
I might pass out here.
Yeah, I say I let it out of the bag, and immediately I feel myself less anxious. The second thing, so cognitive things, talking about it, and then age. I think just getting older helps. For people who suffer from this kind of anxiety, I found that a lot of people, as they get older, it gets better. Maybe not always. But the fourth thing is the most important thing, which is habituation, which is why I don't have to take beta blockers when I teach anymore. And now when I get on stage to sing and play guitar and and do music and stuff, I'm like probably 2% as anxious as I used to be. The reasons for that is reps, man. If you do anything enough, in all likelihood, and it's not overwhelmingly negative for you, in all likelihood, your body just gets used to it. Stand-up comics talk about this all the time. It's like you just got to do the reps. You got to bomb a bunch of times on stage before you just become used to the fact that sometimes you're going to bomb, and your body. Now, what they'll say is you just get used to it, but what was really happening is your physiology is getting used to it. For me, for example, I'm not excited about needles, but every time I have a needle experience, I'm less and less anxious about it. And if I was to have a needle, experience every day for 30 days, the 31st day, my body will probably have no reaction to it. And I don't have to do anything other than just habituate myself to the stimulus. And so, just if anonymous patron, if you want to accelerate your recovery, all the conceptualizations are interesting, but probably the most useful thing is just get up on stage, keep doing it. The first 100 times you do that, you're going to be shaky. It's going to be somewhat humiliating. You're not going to like it. But the 101st time, you're going to be a lot less shaky than the first time, in all likelihood.
The one piece of advice I would have given myself as I was starting out is keep things very simple first, meaning do things that you can do comfortably rather than throwing yourself into the deep end of the pool while you're trying to also deal with the anxiety. Because if I hadn't had to deal with so many variables, I could have been more focused on I know my one guitar part or whatever, and I know I memorized the lyrics. I don't have to deal with all these lights or all these special effects or any of that stuff.
Yeah, very, very important. All right, let's take a break. When we get back, let's answer one more email from famous patron Lynn, and what do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So, Berto, if you were on stage and having massive performance anxiety and you were trying to tell the audience to become a patron of the podcast, what would that sound like?
Well, see, I'd be trying to sing my song about it, and it would go something like this. I've come here tonight to ask you, to ask you to please patronize. Oh God, just give us money, please. God, I'm out of here.
All right. Famous patron Lennon asks us a question. Is it a good idea when breaking up with someone after a relationship of less than a year to just cut off all contact? So it's a pretty specific question. So when you're in a relationship with someone of less than a year and you're breaking up with someone, is it a good idea to just cut all contact with that person? Berto, what do you think?
Like cold turkey, no contact.
Sounds like a very specific question.
Very specific question, yeah. Like he's dealing with it or something. Well, I don't know. I mean, like on the one hand, I always find it sort of bizarre to cut all contact with someone. Unless they've like really done you wrong or something, I suppose. I've always find it very odd. Like, I've never really understood the dynamics of this, where you spend, let's say, let's say 3 months with someone, and you have these meaningful conversations and you have these great times, and then, it didn't work out. And so you move on, and then you never talk to them again. You never see them again. But let alone if you spent a year with someone, that's a long time. And you went on these 2 trips and you did that one thing, and nope, you never. And the reason I find it so bizarre is because I've kept in contact with my friends from when I was little. And I still remember people that, even though I wasn't like particularly close friends with, they were in my classes when I was little. And if I ran into them on the street, I'd be like, oh my gosh, how are you? How's your life been? All these things. I don't go out of my way to reach out to them and stuff like that. So the idea of cutting all contact with someone that you were so close to doesn't register for me. But I realize that it might be healthier in some cases. So I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I have a very similar value that you do of like, hey, we had a relationship, we had a connection, we should have some kind of ongoing relationship, depending on the situation. Just completely cutting off contact just because society says that's a clean break and you're supposed to do that doesn't seem human to me. But what I'll say in general to everyone, because that's just me and you and our values, I think it really depends. Of course, it depends. Yeah. And there's 2 main paths to choose from, and there's pros and cons to either one, and you just have to decide for yourself, Lyndon, what makes sense to you. Of course, the 2 different paths are breaking up amicably and staying in contact, and then the other is to cut all contact. To have contact, you continue your relationship. The pros are you preserve the relationship, which was important. You liked this person a lot at one point, and you preserve that. That you're no longer having sex. Probably you're no longer romantic feelings. You're no longer texting each other all the time, but you still share things in common. You share stories. You share a history together, and we need all the relationships we can build. You might even become best friends with some of these people. You can vent feelings to them when things come up, like soon after, like maybe the breakup was hard, or maybe there was some hurt feelings, and it's a huge pro to be able to like say, hey, that thing you did to me really hurt my feelings, and I know we're broken up, but can you apologize for that again? And that can be a wonderful thing for emotional health, for our ability to trust other people, for grieving. So that's something that a lot of people overlook. Also, when you continue a relationship with someone and you like them after breaking up, particularly if they dumped you, you have an increased hope for humanity and a better chance of being able to trust future partners. Whereas if you just cut off all contact, there's this risk that you're going to be like building up anger, building up a narrative of the person that's quite negative. Of course, that's not automatic, but I see people do that. They're just like, fuck him, and I'm never going to talk to him again. And okay, if you need to do that, then of course. But there's a con to that of like, one, you're going to think that people can't be trusted because you really trusted this person, and now you have this narrative of the person that is like they're the devil, they're just a terrible person that did all these horrible things. So you're going to have a hard time trusting other people, but also you're going to have a hard time trusting yourself because you're the one who fell in love with the person. And if your narrative of that person is they were the devil, then you're not going to trust yourself. So there's a lot of pros to, staying together. Now, the cons to staying in a relationship, being a friend, is jealousy. You're going to see them on Facebook with new partners, potentially Instagram. You might even have dinner parties where you see them with a new partner, or vice versa, where you have a new partner and it triggers jealousy in the other person. And that can be, really hard. The other thing is that you might have a lot of triggered feelings, like you really miss that person. And when you have conversations with them, you're just like, oh man, like I really, and it just prolongs the grief process. And another con is you're going to get odd looks from friends because people tend to judge this unfairly. And so I guess that's a con, although that's kind of bullshit. Now, if you cut all contact, then the pros is you're less likely to get triggered, which is a legit reason to cut all contact with a former partner. If you find that you're being frequently triggered, it's 6 months later and you see them on Facebook and you're just like massive waves of pain and hurt. Now, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you're grieving and you should be feeling those feelings, but there's sort of a balance there. And of course, the cons are you aren't able to have conversations about the relationship in terms of the grieving process, and you might lose hope in other humans. Now, both paths are fine. I encourage people to consider the continuing of the relationship more often than they do. I feel like people in general tend to default to cutting all contact when I don't think that that's necessarily in everyone's best interest all the time, because culture says that's what you're supposed to do. There's this, if you see two people together and, or I guess more specifically, you're in a relationship with someone and that person gets together with their ex-partner, there tends to be this thing like, why are you getting together with your ex-partner? Like that's not normal. You're supposed to cut ties with your ex-partners. And so I find that there's just this default to clean cut and never have any contact with them ever again. So I encourage people to think about it because, again, for the main feature of however long it takes for the two of you to actually have conversations post-breakup about your feelings about the breakup.
Yep.
You did this to me. I'm sorry I did that to you. Though, I have something to say that I need you to hear, and do you understand what I went through? I think all of us can think of things that we would like to say to an ex-partner that we would want them to hear and that we would like an apology for. And we never did that because we were doing the quote unquote clean break. You know what I'm saying, Berto?
Yeah. I mean, I got some gripes of wrath about this topic now that I think about it, because one thing that's happened to me multiple times, I don't know why, but it's happened to me multiple times, is a person will come out from my past and they have just recently broken up with their husband or their boyfriend from a long time or something. And we will reconnect. Sometimes it's happened serendipitously. Sometimes it was on purpose or whatever. And we'll reconnect. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wow. Like this person's back in my life and we're friends again. And then we'll talk and all these things. And we even say oh, we shouldn't let this happen again. We shouldn't cut contact. Then they get into a new relationship. They disappear. They ghost me again. And it's like I'm re-traumatized, It sucks.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why that could be happening, but definitely one of them is that their new partner is threatened and doesn't want that person to have contact with you. Which, again, there's a lot of paths. There's a lot of different ways to live. But I just want people to think about their needs and don't be influenced by society. And, for example, some of these women who have come back in your life and ghosted you, there's at least some of them, if not all of them, where if a therapist could sit down with everyone and be like, okay, woman, do you want to be with Humberto again? No, I don't want to be with him again. He's an old friend of mine. Okay, new boyfriend to woman. Do you need reassurance about the fact that your significant other really loves you? Really working on the jealousy so that we don't have to arbitrarily just cut off relationships as a solution to something that's really deeper, which is the bids for reassurance about love and dedication and loyalty. So yeah. All right, Berto. So what's the final word on this episode?
The final word. Well, I'll say that if you're anxious about performing, then maybe reconnect with an old love and perform in front of them first, and that'll calm your nerves. But in all seriousness, I think, there's a lot of things that we've all experienced. Not everyone has the same experiences, but for me, regarding the performance anxiety, I think you hit it on the nail that repetition is the key. So repeat, and then that'll minimize your symptoms.
All right.
No comment on the rest of this stuff.
All right. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself and other people because
you deserve it.